So,
So how have things been recently since we talked lately?
how have things been? Wow. God, man, it has been a roller coaster ride. I didn't see it coming. We had a session yesterday, and if you're talking about parenting and why things are the way they are in a given couple's dynamic, it's it only makes sense that you're going to have to look at your history, your background.
Mhm.
What is it
Yeah,
that set you up to be the way you are?
yeah.
And um, so somehow it wasn't intentional. It just kind of happened. Of course, I say that, and it's funny because immediately, anytime that is saying that phrase, it's all automatically understood right on the heels of it. Like, well, nothing's intentional. An intention arises, but nothing's intentional. It's not like
Right.
somebody generated that intention prior, and then the intention arose. That's not how it works.
Completely. Completely.
But so as unexpected as it was, wound up getting some focus on me. Like a really sharp spotlight on me, and it was pointed out how I what was it the phrase he used? Not minimize, but I basically kind of explained Susanna's feelings away
Mm.
instead of acknowledging them and giving her the space for her to express her feelings and have her feelings. And the whole thing set off all of that business about being the problem in the family,
Mm.
because that whole thing has been recapitulated in our situation here in recent years. And uh, so that conversation yesterday kind of set off that program. And um, yeah, there were a lot of feelings like feeling really awful about the fact that there are things I do with Susanna or to Susanna that are subtle like that. They're not overt. It's
Hmm.
not like raising a voice and cussing at somebody, calling them names. It's not physical. It's emotional and psychological. And I didn't realize I was doing it. I felt awful. I don't want to treat her or anybody that way.
Yeah.
And so I walked out of that session yesterday, just for the first time in a while. That program will come up from time to time, but when it does, it almost always, if not always, doesn't tend to last, and it's not as intense as it used to be. And
Amazing.
sometimes it doesn't come up at all. I've had situations where it doesn't come up, and you know, I'm aware of the fact that this is the perfect place for this to get provoked,
Yeah.
and it didn't get provoked. Wow, that's really fantastic. So yesterday I got to revisit that for the first time in a long time. I don't remember how long it's been, and I was able to do the affirmations, and that helped some.
Mhm.
But um, so we've got this whole therapy thing going, and I don't know what else is going to get stirred up in the
Go ahead.
process while we're doing this. And it's weird because you and I do something similar, but we do it in the only way I can talk about it is I think of it very much in terms of the Buddhist conception of mundane and super mundane.
Yeah.
You and I approach things at a higher, more subtle, more skillful level.
Yeah.
Therapy is very mundane. It's very nuts and bolts,
Yeah.
and sort of, for lack of a better way of putting it, ordinary. And so
Yeah.
it's really weird doing therapy like that, because my mind will tend to go certain places with things, and I realize that's really not going to make any sense here. That's
Yeah.
not going to work. If I say that, he's probably not going to really be able to follow me where I'm going
Exactly.
with this.
Yeah, exactly. And therapy is much more about the story and the belief that there really are people here living these
Yes.
actual things with these real emotions that are these, really felt experiences and really validating a lot of the stuff in a way which is, useful for certain, I mean, there is obviously a utility to therapy, and especially for people who aren't going into the completely deconstructing, experience and breaking apart the self and all of that.
Right.
for that, it's extremely useful. It only sort of runs into those barriers when we're doing something where we're seeing through the whole existence of self, free will, agency, emotions being a real thing, all of that. Then all of a sudden, a lot of those sort of story building aspects of therapy start to come into conflict with what we're doing.
Mm,
And just because we're is what we sometimes just kind of caution people about is that it can reinforce the story of my actual history, and this was really something that happened to me, and it reinforces that sense of self and personal narrative, that we're kind of what we're trying to do is to deal with the ramifications of the stuff that has happened and all of the lingering manifestations that are here now. But we try to work with that in a way that it's not using the story itself to get there. We're not using this supposed truth of a narrative flow of existence in order to deal with these things because they are here now. And, like we're doing a lot of embodiment stuff now. Pernilla has been doing a lot of embodiment stuff now, getting ready for the next retreat in the end of March, because it's very much about that. And it's really about letting the body work out a lot of these things without having to go into the mind. It's really getting to the root of it without engaging story and belief and thought and me and all of that stuff.
right.
Um, but what I'm curious about with both your experience of experiencing again that feeling of being the one who's always wrong, who's always doing the wrong thing. I would like to dig into that a little bit and how this experience is now when it came up, but then also like the therapist had said that you were how'd you put it, devaluing Susanna's
Yeah,
feeling.
that wasn't the right word. I'm kind of
Oh,
getting an approximation. I wish I could remember the word, but anyway, go ahead.
well, yeah, but I'm curious, like in those, I assume he came up with, or she came up with specific, there was like an instance that was being talked about when you did this, right? Whether it was in the therapy session or,
Yeah, it was actually happened in the session. He was asking her to tell me something that she otherwise had a hard time telling me. And she told me, and then I responded with something that was talk about reinforcing the story, defensive, because who you're protecting. And and in doing so, um, wound up diminishing or minimizing her feelings. I wish I remember the word he used. So
well, that's what I'm wondering. So, because like you said, you don't want to do this, you don't want to hurt people, and you want to be more aware of it. So going forward, uh, well, in going forward, let's go backwards. Can you remember in that during that discussion that happened when you got defensive? Do you remember what it was that you were getting defensive about? And
hmm.
a bit more importantly, even what you were feeling at that moment when you were starting to feel that defensiveness come up?
Yeah. So what was the first question? What was I
Uh,
feeling defensive about?
yeah, like what was actually going on in the conversation that you started to feel like you needed to defend something?
Well, I can't remember the specifics, and I wish I could,
Yeah.
but he pointed out that when Susanna had communicated what she did to me, communicated what she needed to say to me, that I became, I took a defensive stance, and in doing so, I more or less kind of brushed her feelings aside,
Mm.
and so I was feeling. Let me think about this for a sec.
It would help if you could remember what the thing was that she said that triggered that something in you that you then felt like you needed to defend yourself
It
against.
wasn't what she said. It was, I guess it was. It was, I had a reaction to what she said, but I had an even stronger reaction when the therapist pointed out that
Yeah, but
I,
we're going to come to that part second. But right now, I'm curious about the first part, the defensive reaction to what Susanna said.
Okay. I don't know how much we can do with this, considering I can't remember what it
Yeah,
was that
it'll be
she
helpful
said.
if we can get some actual because that way there we can
Yeah.
because really where I'm going with it is that it will help if you can become more aware of what was happening in that moment of she said whatever she said, and it still had some triggering juice for you. What's that?
And the way you phrase that.
No. And that was, that whole defensive posture that came after that, and then the devaluation after that, it that was just your deflection from whatever you were feeling in the moment that, you know, you heard something that still touched a nerve. And so
Right.
it's really important to get to that and then to notice going forward before you get to that point of however you devalued or, you know,
Minimized or just
minimized, yeah, her feelings. That's that again is all coming out of that deflection
oh,
posture.
I
Oh,
know what it was. I know what it was. She was saying something to
yeah.
me about how it was there were two sides or two aspects to this one thing that when in the past, because it doesn't happen very often. In fact, for the first time, Sunday night, for the first time in truly years, even Susanna said that she couldn't remember the last time it happened. I actually got angry about something.
Mm,
um, and so it was one, the issues around when I get angry because I feel like I get shamed for it.
mhm,
And then Susanna was saying that when it does happen, no one can say her and Tuesday both they can't they don't they there's this sort of censoring for them. That's how, at least that's how they perceive it, and maybe that is how I presented it. I don't know, but this censoring around the use of the word yelling, because the minute anytime someone, particularly me, I notice it doesn't happen with them. Like if
yeah.
if Tuesday raises her voice a little bit, it's not yelling, but with me, um, if I my voice goes above normal speaking level, even just a few decibels, it becomes yelling.
Mm,
And that's always been frustrating for me because of the fact that I already feel ashamed for getting angry. And now I'm not talking about rage and acting out inappropriately, which, was a problem in years past until what was that, I guess. And it's weird to be able to know where the line is,
yeah,
but
I know.
it was 2011 where the event happened that really completely just disassembled that whole structure, because it started off with being much less frequent and much less intense to it eventually just died off. And
Amazing.
it's like, hooray, let's celebrate, the rage is gone.
Mm,
um, so uh, but even without that, even with that being no longer an issue, even just getting angry in the sense that there's obvious frustration, maybe I'm talking faster, um, my voice has gone up a little bit, not yelling, not
mhm,
yelling, just, let's say my voice has gone up 6 dB or something, then that becomes yelling. I feel ashamed.
mhm.
And that goes back to the way things were growing up in my house, because there was a lot of shaming around that.
Yeah.
So,
Do you feel like there's shame coming from Suzanne and Tuesday about it, or is it purely internal at this point?
that's hard to say. My guess is that there's not really shaming coming from them.
Mhm,
That what there is there's kind of a double standard. And
mhm.
so pointing out my being upset or angry and having this sort of double standard in place, um, causes me to feel the shame, or causes the shame to arise.
So they point out to you that you seems like you're getting angry, is what you're
Yes.
saying?
Yeah. They say something about my getting angry. And then, like I said, the double standard, because without getting into details, there was a time once back when we had that period of a couple of years where everything just kind of fell apart, and there was a time once when I wound up getting upset about something, and then they also got upset,
Mhm.
and my being upset was labeled abuse. Their
Mhm.
being upset was perfectly acceptable, even though there wasn't a great deal of difference between what any of the three of us had, how we behaved, outwardly behaved. And so that kind of
So,
double standard tends to
yeah.
increase or intensify the sense of shame.
So, the way that it is now, when you experience, anger in whatever form it shows up in,
Mhm.
I know you said that it's expressed by speaking more quickly, maybe slightly elevated tone,
Mhm.
maybe pitch. Um, what is the context that that's arising in, though? Like, are you, does it feel like you are getting angry or frustrated about something which is external to the situation of the house, or is it something which is relevant to the context of, the people that you're with or the situation that you're in?
Do you mean just in a general sense, that rather than one specific instance?
Well, either way. Yeah.
Um, well, I don't know about a specific instance because, well, like for instance, on Sunday when I got angry,
Yeah.
that was because, and I think it was a misunderstanding in part, but in the misunderstanding, I had this idea that um, Susanna was going to say no to something that we talked about in advance, saying no to,
Mhm.
and she asked me about it. Something about that, I don't recall what, caused me to feel pressured to give the answer that I thought she wanted, but that's not the answer I wanted to give. And so I became angry at the situation and with her. Uh,
Mhm.
um, so aside from that specific instance, I mean, it really depends. I mean, sometimes it can be one or the other. Sometimes there are times it's probably both.
Well, I'm curious. The reason I bring it up is because I'm curious how much, of course, we always have our very limited view of how our behavior is being perceived by others or how we think it's being expressed, so I think I'm only raising my voice a little bit. I think I'm only, being a little bit quick and agitated, but we have no idea how it actually looks from the outside. We,
Right.
we can't really trust that perception. And so if if you're sitting around a table and you're ranting about politics and it's something that's not localized in the room, people tend to
Uh,
have more, it might be perceived in a different way than if they take it that you're getting angry about something that they did or about a situation that's going on here,
I
which
see.
which could be, you have the questionability of your own perception, the accuracy of your own perception about how I am really expressing. I'm not yelling, I mean, we have that sort of thing, right? Like people tend to do that. And I'm not saying that you do necessarily, but we know our internal perception of things is not necessarily accurate. And we know that our perception of how somebody else is acting isn't necessarily accurate based on all of our projections about what we think. So if I'm in an argument with you, I feel like you are angry at me about something, I am probably going to perceive you as being even more angry, especially if I have a history of having arguments with you and I'm worried about where this is going to go and I'm, feeling all of that, like the collective weight of that, of the emotional history of all of that stacking on into this moment. Now all of a sudden it's not just you having a slightly quick cadence and, slightly elevated volume. Now I'm perceiving it with all of this other bias on top of it and thinking
Right.
that, it's about me and I'm feeling all this other stuff. So from the outside, well, I mean, hearing about it in the past, we don't have a video recording of it, so we can't really go back and say how things really were showing up. But I think it would be interesting to take note of if it feels like you seem to be getting more, that they're pointing out to you that it's you're getting angry about something when it's something which is more relevant to them. You know, it's something where it's about the situation or anger with one of them or something like that, as opposed to maybe something which is just, you know, I don't know, tax bill came and I'm feeling upset about the whatever. Um, so being aware of that might be useful going forward.
Well, now that you've said what you said, just have that explains to me or clarifies the question you asked me a little bit ago, and the answer to that about is it things outside of what's going on here? No, it's not. These situations are always about what's going on in our home, our family, um, things like politics or, things that are, um, I don't know how to put it. Um, well, politics is a good example. Things of that sort, things that are happening they're at a bigger level, and they're not really directly personal. Those sorts of things almost never are a problem in this
Hmm.
house. I mean, I can't think of the last time, if ever, anything like that was an issue between Susanna and I. It's always, you know, things between us, things in our life, things in our family. Um, yeah, so, that's to answer your question. It's
Yep.
always the things that cause upset, cause anger, what have you, and the situations that arises out of. It's always personal. It's always something, for lack of a better way of putting it, something that's within the home.
Yeah. So you know, we don't know, right? It could be that they are being extra sensitive to it because of the context and because of the personal history and all of that. Or it could be that you are just not very accurate with your assessment of how you are externalizing the angry, you know, uh, experience.
Well, it's probably some of both because, um, I'm sure there have been plenty of times I was not seeing things accurately. But, one thing I know about Susanna that I found out in recent years, I'd known about the things that happened to her as a kid. We
Yeah.
talked about that very early on.
Yeah.
But um, I found out from actual lived experience about um, how those things come into play between us. Because even though the trauma is not something that's just right on her sleeve now, still the fact that I'm male, the fact that I'm
Yeah.
6 feet tall and however much I weigh,
Yeah.
fairly decent physical size, um, that can become kind of threatening or intimidating to her, even
Yeah.
though I'm not doing anything to be threatening or intimidating.
Of course.
You
Yeah.
know,
And
so
and
that I understand that it could be happening on both ends. Now, in recent years, I've become really careful about watching what I'm doing when I get upset. How am I talking? And then,
Mhm.
even more recently, you've asked me to become really aware of how I move and move more slowly. And so I
Yeah.
automatically start to slow down
Nice.
because I'm doing
Nice.
everything I can to not give off the slightest hint. But as an aside, I'll say this: there was one time something happened, and I got upset, and so I immediately started slowing down, moving very carefully. I was making sure to talk in a very normal tone of voice. I mean, it's like the equivalent of trying to walk through the woods and not make any noise.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
and so then at some point in time before I was able to leave the room, Susanna said, "You're upset, aren't you?" What? Am I giving off little smoke signals? Is there a little guy on top of my head doing semaphore? What's going on here?
It's incredible, right? We have so many subtle tells that it doesn't have to be throwing something across the room before it, becomes visible to others. I mean, like Pernilla is absolutely amazing at noticing micro movements in people's expressions. And I mean, she can tell like I mean, like we'll just be having a conversation about something, or we'll be sitting something, and she'll know what's going on, like mentally, internally, or whatever, by like the tiniest little, like you had this little right here that just moved a little bit, and she can see it. And obviously, most people, I mean, I think we might not know because she's like, really studied it and learned what each of these things means.
Mhm.
Most of us, if we were asked, we wouldn't necessarily be able to say, well, anger looks like this muscle and this one, and this expression is exactly like this. But we know it when we see it. And
Mhm.
even in these kind of subtle portrayals, even when somebody's really doing their best to hold it together, we can tell little things about the mouth, little things about the eyes, tension in the muscles, there's something that still comes across, and it belies that attempt, our best attempt at covering up our internal emotions. It's really good though to, not just be blasting it out and externalizing it. And that shows, a lot of growth and self-restraint and awareness and all of that, which is amazing. But it is, they're, especially if somebody really knows us, you might be able to fool a passing stranger, but
Mhm.
when you're in close proximity to somebody and they really know your expressions and have that sense of you, it's much harder to fool them with. And so, it probably wasn't something that was really visibly smoke coming out of the ears, but you're there's some, enough facial things, enough tension, strain in the neck, something that gives off this appearance. And it's again, this is the thing where it's like we don't want to vilify the fact that an emotion arises. You shouldn't feel shame that anger shows up, because anger itself is not a shameful thing. It's a reaction. It's a deflection.
Hmm.
It's something which happens. It's not an intent. It's not like you've made the choice that now I'm going to become angry and the next 10 minutes are just going to be, you know, blind fury and whatever, or I'm just going to sit here inwardly seething. Like, you wouldn't choose that. it is
Right.
it is something which has been started as a natural as a defense mechanism from many, 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 many years ago, and it's just something that still currently happens in some smaller and more subtle state than it used to. Great, it's not happening like it used to, but we don't want to make more out of it than it is. I mean, it's the arising of anger isn't necessarily a failure of you, right? Like,
Yeah.
when we it's like putting aside for just a second, for the sake of the metaphor, the fact that, free will doesn't actually exist.
Right.
It would be like, you know, if your defense mechanism is to rob a bank, then we could say, all right, so every time, something happens, you go out and you have to rob a bank. Well, there's maybe a little something more in that than this briefly arising flurry of sensations, because that's all the anger is, right? In the
Right.
past, you have had an experience. It has been met with a certain sensation in the body, which gives you a feeling of power. It gives you a feeling of externalization. It's not about me, it's about them. It's something else out there. It's that distraction from what I'm feeling. That is no different than if you suddenly responded with laughter, right? It's just the body's way of distracting from something that's uncomfortable. And there are people that in stressful situations, they laugh. There are some people that in stressful situations, they get angry. There are other people that in stressful situations, they literally fall asleep, because it's like their defense mechanism is just shutting down, and that's
Wow.
their thing. And so it's not that one of them is making you a good or bad person. If you just because you respond to criticism with laughter doesn't make you a better person than having this feeling of what we call anger arise. It's just biology. It's just sensation arising in the body. It's what we do with that determines how much suffering we have and how much the people around us are going to experience. Because if I just laugh, I don't feel that much. turbulence internally.
Right.
Somebody says to me that I'm bald and ugly and I laugh. Well, if that is a very different experience internally than getting angry and getting up in arms about it and then punching the person. So for the people around us and for the internal experience, laughter just feels different than externalizing with some sort of anger. But the actual biological chemical uprising that gives to either a feeling of joy and laughter or a feeling of what we call anger is exactly the same in terms of like the morality of it or is that clear what I'm saying? Like there's
Yeah, it is. It not only is it clear, but it has made it has made the obvious obvious. And
nice.
I say that because it had never occurred to me until now. And I'm really this is so obvious it's ridiculous. I mean, why did it take however many decades for this detail to become clear that when I was a kid, even into my teens, and actually even into my 20s, but especially in my as a kid in my teens, being in the home with my parents, especially my mom, I would get incredibly angry, raging,
Yeah,
yelling, and throwing things down, putting holes in walls. I think a window got broken once. So, and my dad didn't like it, but he handled it one way. My
yeah,
mom, being who she was, handled it another way, and she said all kinds of really. She just said things that a parent shouldn't say to a kid
mm,
ever in that situation, no matter how wrong I was, which I
yeah,
was. But she said, she made it personal instead
mm,
of, hey, this is out of hand. You need to go to your room. This happens again. This is what we're going to do. This is not appropriate. But instead, she'd hurl personal attacks,
yeah,
and I mean, and saying things that just, like I said, no parent should ever say that to a kid.
yeah,
And so, it's no wonder that there's a sense of shame associated with it. And
exactly.
so, fast forward and, after having done work to get myself free from a lot of that stuff I'd been carrying around with me, the rage disappeared. And
Hmm.
now I could get angry and my voice might get louder. I might talk faster, but I wasn't saying things that were unkind or harsh or rude. I wasn't speaking at really loud, uncomfortable, or, actually outright yelling. But
Yeah,
I was obviously upset and, it was an appropriate level of anger, but there's still that shame
yeah,
because of how it all began going back to childhood.
yeah,
And I never really fully made that connection before that this is just, it's just like the bad guy program. It's just another
exactly.
program. The code was written and installed as a kid. And
Yeah,
now in certain contexts, that program gets fired off and it runs,
exactly.
you know?
And it's based off of that idea that feeling this feeling of anger in the body is a shameful activity.
Right,
It's like if you were brought up feeling that lust or sexual excitement was a shameful activity, and now I have to go whip myself because I got excited, whatever it
right.
is. Like it's that same idea that we're
Yeah.
putting so much more on top of a biological process than is really there. We're making it not only either right or wrong to experience this thing, but because I have experienced it, I am a shameful being. There is something wrong with me and I need to be fixed or cleansed or something else because I'm just not okay because I felt an emotion. You know,
Well, there's another side to this that just again, this was something that was really obvious, but when other people get angry, I have a similar reaction. It's not the same one I have about myself, but there's a
Mhm.
similar sort of response that comes up because my dad, I mean, with the exception of one time, my dad never was, physically inappropriate in terms of like corporeal punishment.
Yeah,
Um, and when he got angry, it was always at inanimate objects.
yeah, yeah,
I can't really, well, I can remember getting angry at my mom, but he didn't really get angry at me and my sisters much. It was more like, he couldn't get the tire off to change the brakes or something. Um, uh, and when he did get angry, it would be pretty explosive. And as a kid, I don't know how. It's still a mystery to this day. I've long wondered why it is that I personalized that. I internalized it. Oh, he's angry. That has something to do with me.
Yeah.
Somehow I'm wrong. I'm bad.
Yeah.
And somehow tied into all of that is the way my mom handled it when I got angry. Because, if Susanna gets angry, there's kind of that shirking away that I used to do with my dad, and kind of a sense of, wow, that's really wrong. You know,
Yeah.
it's not wrong when I do it. It's not wrong when they do it.
And this is the thing though. I think what's really interesting with anger is because there are the two parts of it. On the very, very core of the thing is the fact that anger doesn't actually exist. So at the very,
Mm,
very root of it, it is literally just a sensation that's arising in the body and some thoughts about something. Right? That is the core, but that's not how we experience it most of the time. Most of the time, what we experience is this sensation in the body, and there's a feeling of whatever thoughts are attached to it are real. There's some belief in the story of I've been wronged by this person, or I'm defensive about something and I feel, and there's this, kind of building where I need to externalize the blame someplace else. I can't handle this feeling that's arising here. I need to do something else. And so that's our deflection from it. So
mm,
we can have the experience of this just rising in the body. And if we don't buy into it, it does rise and it passes and it's not, it doesn't last. If we buy into the story, it, we start to feel what we call classically anger because we're starting to believe the stories of it. That is a level where, it might be visible, like you had said, you were trying not to speak loudly, you're slowing down, you're moving slow, like being aware of all that, but it might still be noticeable to an external because there's still something going on where you're clearly buying into the reality of anger existing for a moment. And then there's that third level where we really ex- uh, um, externalizing it, where then we're yelling or taking it out on inanimate objects or things like that. And I think if we are going to be judgmental towards any aspect of the anger experience, and it sounds like what you were saying, like when you see other people doing it or, your father doing it, it's the judgment towards the externalization of it. It's their
ah,
inability to just be with the sensation. And so they have to take it out on something or someone else or express it so that everybody knows that they are angry and, you know, have to do that. And that is, what just traditionally we would call being, emotionally immature or, emotionally dysregulated. Like we can feel this thing that we call anger without having to put our fist through a wall or without
right.
having to launch a vase across the room, right? That's where it's like, okay, yes, there is something there for you to work with. Like there is definitely, if that's you're so unable to be with this in the body that I have to just unleash it by breaking something or hurting somebody else. That is something which, we're not condoning by any means, and it's
Mhm.
really unnecessary. And so I get the kind of judgment isn't the right word, but having that like, okay, that's really not necessary. That's you can do better. Like having that kind of feeling, like I get that. The problem is that you're extending that to every part of the biological experience of that thing that we call anger arising. So as long as there is just a twinge of rising in the body, that shouldn't be there. I'm shameful. I'm a bad person because that even
Ah,
arose to begin with. It doesn't
I
have to come
see.
out. It doesn't have to be visible to anybody else, but damn it, it's there. And so we want to lose that judgment where we're making it into something that it's not. Is it okay that you're a biological being that has these rises and falls of different emotions because different hormones are being triggered and passing through it? Having an acceptance of that fact and knowing that it's not about me, right? It's not that there is something wrong with me because I see an apple and my mouth starts watering, or I, have, I don't know, somebody yells at me or says something and I start to feel this fluttering in the chest and this feeling of tension in the neck. Okay, just recognize that is just it's an immediate process that's happening and it's not personal. But we can stop there and we can go back and then we can do that sort of second feder work of like, why is this actually a problem? That anger is the biological arising is a defense from something else. It's being triggered by something else. There's some core belief there which is trying to be protected. So when that person says to me something that is going to trigger that feeling, why is that the thing that does it?
It's that.
And then look into that aspect of it to see why that defensiveness is even necessary. What were you actually feeling before the anger came up? Were you feeling a moment of guilt or of not being good enough or of having that old I'm always wrong process that, kicks in and there's a feeling in the body that's associated with being the scapegoat or being the one who's always the bad guy? How did that feel in the body first before the defensive anger comes in to deflect you from that? Because that's somehow a more acceptable or pleasant thing that we've learned to feel instead of that, you know.
So it's enough to ask, in order to try to figure out what's preceding that anger, it's enough to just ask what is the core belief that's being protected by the anger.
Effectively, yeah, if you can feel into like if in the moment you can notice it coming and kind of quickly rewind the tape back to feel what was I just feeling a second ago before the anger, or even bring up, well, Susanna said blah 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 and then I got angry. Hold on, something probably happened in between her saying something and you feeling anger. There was probably an intermediary emotion that came up really quickly. You felt something in the body really quickly, and that is just not okay. And then anger becomes the preferable reaction to it.
Okay. Yeah, there's something else at work here too that just sort of revealed itself that uh, there's this, I don't know what to call it, but there's something about the family system or a social group. It's generally been the family for me, but it can also be, I'm sure it could also be social groups, but it seems like family has more potency to it, that I'm looking to them for my cues. You know, they're telling me, and what
Mhm.
they're having to say, what they have to say about it is is sort of the arbiter of truth. That, like for instance, if they say there's a problem with anger, well, that's true.
Mhm.
That I have with
Yeah.
unconsciously been relying on, my family that I was born into, or this one that Susanna and I have evolved together. Um, that um, I look to them to tell me, what's right or what's true or what's correct, even though that's really not a reliable source.
Yeah, it's a very mixed bag because on one hand, like we talked about, everybody does have their own perceptions from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
It's also again, it's kind of an interesting and difficult one because I only have your view of things, that I'm
Right.
hearing. If you're in a house where multiple people are saying that there's an issue with your anger, then most likely the only way that they notice that is if there is an externalization of it, like your father throwing stuff across the room or hitting objects, or, something where it's like I said, it's being restrained, but it's there and it's tense. Now, if there is an externalization of it, then, it is something where, okay, listen to the other people because there's obviously something there that is pointing you to that you can look into how am I expressing this in ways that other people are noticing it? And why does it feel like I have to, express this thing and can't just sit with this unease and turbulence in the body? But then also, even if I feel like I am doing all of the, really good controlling of it and just being there, well, now what is it about the situations, the dynamic in the house, which is leading to that anger feeling being the most likely useful diversion? Is there just a feeling of sadness or fear or something else going on in the house all the time or in your body all the time being in the house that is what you're really distracting from in those moments of feeling anger?
Hmm.
Because the anger is not the primary. So there
Right.
has to be something there which you're feeling before that. And, I mean, just knowing the situation of things in the house at this point, I could see there being, fear about the outcome of certain things and tension about other things and, so worry, anxiety, fear. But there could also be, I mean, loneliness, sadness, all these other things can be there, many other things.
I can tell you what it is.
Yeah, there you go.
It is, and it's funny because I wrote something about this the other day. Um, but it is about feeling helpless, powerless,
Yeah.
because one, since the summer of 2022, when Suzanne was diagnosed with cancer, which fortunately we've managed to, that's for the time being anyway, that's not an issue. That
Yeah.
was, as far as we know, successfully treated. And the last time they checked, the markers are down. There's, for years now, up until just now we're finally starting to address it. Tuesday kind of ran the house. She
Mhm.
kind of had control because she knew that she could divide and conquer. And so there were a percentage of the time that I could get done what I knew needed to be done, like, hey, you need to go to bed because you got to get up at 5 tomorrow morning and get ready for school, or um, it's your turn to do the dishes, or whatever it might be. But
Yeah.
there are also a lot of the times, and it's oftentimes around money and spending, to the point of causing problems for ourselves, that Tuesday we'll go to Susanna and she'll play the divide and conquer game and get what she wants. And then we get to a point in time and everyone's wondering why, we're limping along until the next infusion of cash.
Yeah.
Um, and, I'm trying to do something about it because I can see how this is a problem we don't have to have. We can eliminate this if we're just willing to do some things differently.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I can't. And so I,
Hmm.
I feel helpless. I feel powerless. Some of it has to do with money. Some of it has to do with people's health. Um, and so uh, I can tell you that in the last week to 2 weeks, I have woken up in the morning realizing I've been gritting my teeth in my sleep. So I know that's weighing on the mind.
Yep.
So
So with this feeling of absolute powerlessness,
mhm.
can you bring up any of these things and just feel how that feels in the body?
When you say any of these things, which you mean the situations I just
That you've
described,
just been listing. Yeah. Yeah.
can I bring them up and do what now?
In the mind and feel that sense of powerlessness
Hmm.
that it brings up, that you literally don't know and can't do anything about Susanna's health, or that you can't really control Tuesday's behaviors, and feel how that feels in the body.
Let me zero in on
Yeah.
it. Yeah, it's hard to bring it up to the same level that it has when it's actually happening, but I can
Sure.
I can kind of get in touch with it
It
somewhat.
can, it can be useful too to have that sort of your uh, it's there in a smaller dose, so you can really get a handle on how exactly helplessness feels. And then also, can it's sort of like becoming inoculated with a small dose of a virus. It's like, okay, well, I can handle this much. Okay, I can feel this. I know what this is like. And the really important thing there is to notice that right now you can feel just the raw sensation of the helplessness. And, we triggered it by a thought. We triggered it by a thought of Susanna's health or Tuesday not being able to, you're not following your commands and, not being able to control another person. But once you start to feel with the sensation, those thoughts effectively are not really connected to it. They kind of just go on their own. And a big difference is when you are in an actual situation that is stressful with all of these things coming up,
Mhm.
you're hearing or seeing aspects of the situation live. You're feeling these exact sensations in the body. They may or may not be a little bit stronger, but it's basically the same constellation of sensations. But there is a feedback of more thought about it. I'm hearing more and more words about this. Now I'm picturing Susanna going in for a procedure and what if? And then that triggers more of these sensations. And then Tuesday's not doing blah blah blah. And well, how's that feeling? Oh, and what if she continues down this path? And then you're picturing future possibilities of, you know, fines and other things that happen and so on and so forth. And all of that keeps feeding into the body and making it more and more and more uncomfortable. And so, what we're doing when we do it kind of beforehand, like we were just doing, is you're recognizing just the bare physical, the physicality of it, just the physical sensations as they are. You're also noticing how much of the mental construct is feeding into that, but also sort of its own thing. And hopefully getting to where even in the moment, you can kind of isolate those things. So you can be in a situation talking with Susanna about her health and the upcoming future and all of these different aspects. And you might feel the sensation in the body, but can you keep those two levels separated?
Which two
So
levels? The
you have
sensation of the body and
and the level of thought of, and conversation.
okay.
So I'm able to talk about your health and your, our future together and all of that. And I'm feeling what's happening in the body, but it's not the totality of the experience. And the two, the thought aspect and the physical sensation, aren't connected as one big beast of emotion.
Okay.
Do you follow? So you're able to then basically live where you're in a conversation, you can be talking about the future, you can feel that there's something going on in the body, but it doesn't overwhelm to the point where you have to then start to deflect with those anger feelings and then have that become another whole issue of its own. We can keep it to where I just feel helpless, and you can vocalize the fact that I feel helpless. It's okay that I feel helpless. Acknowledge the fact that this is just what's happening right now. And there's no shame about feeling helpless. There's no issue with it. It doesn't have to go away. It is impermanent, but still, that when you are talking about her health and the future and all of that, it's an acknowledgement that we are all helpless. We just don't know what's going to happen, and we don't know the right thing to do in any given circumstance. We assume the best option that what we're taking is the best option, but we don't know. We make hopefully the most informed decision that we can, but it's all with a super limited amount of information. It's never enough to really know the outcome of any decision. So
Hmm.
that in itself is such a powerful insight to come to, because then we can recognize there is a feeling of unease about not knowing. And that's really at the core of it. It's that unease at the fact that we just don't know what the best thing to do is, and we just can't make the future conform to the way that I would like it to be. I also can't make the present conform to the way I would like it to be. So feel how that feels in the body. It's okay. Let there be a little turbulence in the body. And then you can also feel that it's okay for that to be there. I don't need for it to be different because I don't need to, if we were able to reconfigure the world so that we always felt happy and good and everything was great, we would do something to try to never feel that again, right? We don't want to feel helpless, so we would do everything that we could to not feel helpless. So instead, we acknowledge the fact that this is just a feeling in the body that we call helplessness. It's here, it's okay. When the thoughts about helplessness and the thoughts about controlling the future and wanting something to be a certain way stop coming, that feeling basically loses its charge. It loses its meaning. It's just sensation in the body that has flooded through because of a variety of different hormones and, chemicals. They go away, it goes too. There's nothing inherently real about the feeling of helplessness, just like there's nothing inherently real about fear or anger or happiness or any of that. They're temporary biological states of a system,
Right.
have a certain hallmark. It's this idea that we have about, I need the world to be a certain way. I need Susanna to live and be healthy. I need Tuesday to conform to how I think she should behave and make life easy for all of us so that the government doesn't get involved and everybody's just happy and content. And it really boils down to an acceptance of the fact that I can't really do any of that. I'm still going to engage. I'm still going to do what I think is the best thing at the time, but I don't know. And so we can have that acceptance and then that letting go. And in that acceptance, we're also accepting what is here in the moment. And that is keeping us so that we're not feeding and stoking the fires of that belief in that thing called helplessness.
How, and I'll say that again. How are we not
Yeah.
stoking the fires of that feeling?
Because the fires of that feeling are stoked by thoughts that
Okay.
it should be a certain way.
Right.
I need to do something to protect myself, or I need to protect us from this thing. And if you come to the acknowledgement that, I just can't. I'm gonna do all my research. I'm going to make the best decision possible. But ultimately I don't know how any of that's going to lead. If you can come to that, then that feeling of scared helplessness doesn't have any grounding. There's no fire for it any, or no wood for its fire anymore because that is only coming from that resistance to what is and what might be. It's all coming from that thought-based, I don't want this or I don't want that potential future. I want this other one.
Okay.
So
So
keep
it
finding.
begins with um, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. It begins with that thought and not allowing ourselves to be um, bedeviled by that thought,
Yeah,
by somehow in some way setting that aside.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, well, you said it. It was by finding acceptance for the way things are. Okay.
Yeah. And we've talked about this in the past, but also having that sense of uh what's the word? Not conviction, but sort of the confidence that you can handle anything no matter what
Oh,
happens.
yeah.
It's
Okay.
that thing that if it happens, it is what's happening and I'm going to roll with it and it can handle whatever shows up. It's that.
Well, it's funny that we're talking about this because the thing that I made a note of earlier, and I don't know what it was in regard to. I mean, it seemingly came up out of nowhere. I couldn't tell you what it was in regard to. It was really actually what it was. It was just a feeling. I was laying on the bed watching something with Susanna, and I noticed this sort of uncomfortable feeling. Like, well, what's that? So I just kind of got curious about it, and in getting curious, um, three words popped up: defenseless, unprotected, and innocent.
Mm. Wow.
And so there, of course, there was this sense of something that's fairly old at this point.
Yep.
And there were some vague scenes of various things when I was a kid. Um, like I remember once making a trip about 5 blocks down the road on a very busy road, I might add, to the grocery store, and my mom not even realizing I was gone. And the guy at the grocery store, I don't know how he knew to get in touch with my mom, but somehow they got in touch with my mom and said, "Hey, we get your kid down here." And that was not the only time I did something
Yeah.
along those lines where I left the house, and then later she's wondering where in the heck I'm at.
Yeah.
So you talk about unprotected. But
Seriously.
anyway, so there were little scenes like that, little recollections, but I couldn't pin it down to any one particular thing. But the defenseless, that ties into the powerlessness and helplessness.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's just another, really just kind of another way of saying that.
And it's interesting because on one level, we can see that as a child, you absolutely were. Now, as an adult, in and this is where we're in kind of those funny little layers of relative reality and sort of more ultimate truth. Uh, you are more, you are on that relative level, you are much less powerless now than you were as a 5-year-old,
Yeah,
right?
you're right.
You have a lot, we act as though we are still in the same position as we were as a child when we first experienced these things.
Hmm.
So we had that feeling of like that child was unprotected and unsafe and innocent and all of that. And then we carry that feeling on and we go, oh, I remember that feeling. And I still feel that sense of unprotected, um, vulnerability, that defenselessness, all of that. Recognizing now that as an adult, on the relative level, you are much more capable of defense and protection and being there for you in a way that you were not able as a 5-year-old. That you don't actually need somebody else to provide that level of protection and defense for you anymore. That this is
Right.
completely in your domain now. You did when you were 5. You couldn't take care of yourself and you did need a parent. And that's why we talk about the reparenting stuff because
Mm.
some of that still lingers. Now you get to do that as the wise adult who you needed back when you were 5. So you're here now. So on that level of practicality, you are the adult that you need. So in those moments when you're feeling helpless and vulnerable, you can also have that wise, calm equanimity to tell yourself, it's okay. We've got this. We will be okay. We will handle this.
Yeah.
Or
Well, I mean, I'm in far better shape.
yeah,
I'm in far better shape under my own care than I ever was when my mother was responsible for things.
exactly. And it's a shame that that was the case, but now it's not the case anymore.
Right.
She's not here anymore to do whatever she did in that way. You are here. You are now taking up the mantle of being the protective parent. The question is, though, how many times throughout the day do you play her role instead of yours? When you feel that shamefulness come up about certain behaviors, you're
Oh,
playing her role instead of yours.
Interesting.
So notice how often that programming comes up.
Okay.
And instead be the kind, protective, wise, loving parent that you needed
For myself, you mean?
for yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, also for Tuesday, which is handy because you're in that kind of position now. Like I said in that email, this is also a perfect example for you to externalize that kind of completely, open, generous, equanimous sort of behavior that is absolutely selfless in that way, and really doing the exact opposite of what you experienced as a child, from a parent, and really get to inhabit that, like have that complete open compassion to yourself and the complete open compassion to her, and see.
Well, I'm diligently and earnestly working in that direction. And it's difficult sometimes because of the fact that you can say something to her in order to try to help.
Mm,
And I'm just going to say this as a quick aside.
yeah,
The environment she's been raised in and being able to divide and conquer appears to have led to somebody who is extremely entitled,
yeah,
because that really is the only way I know how to describe that behavior. Is very entitled and very self-absorbed, which is also partly teenager, but
yeah.
it's happening at a much more intense level than I'm used to seeing. Um, and so you can try to do things that are kind. You can try to do things that, where you're being patient and giving them room to be who they are and try to help them out. And you'll get chewed out, or get some caustic judgment dumped on you or something like that.
But
So,
why does that have to be a problem?
and every time this happens, that's the thing that comes up.
Yeah,
You may take some pleasure in knowing that you live in my head now,
I do.
because
Thank you for that.
that that definitely comes up regularly, where there's the reaction and I'm realizing this doesn't have to be an issue.
Exactly.
But what
Wonderful.
happens is I recognize that, and then I forget to do anything with it later because I'm dealing with that situation. And then later comes and I've completely forgotten it. But
Baby.
maybe, just maybe, there is some benefit to just being able to recognize in that moment that this doesn't need to be a problem. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those baby steps things that,
Okay.
you start to notice it more and more. It becomes more and more ingrained. And then again, when you have the chance and you remember to look into it, why was that particular caustic thing problematic?
I'm going to start setting reminders. If I have my phone handy, I'm going to send myself an email.
Nice. Yeah.
And then the other thing too that has there was something else around that. Um, when those reactions pop up. I know what it is. I've been trying to just get to the point where when she says something that stimulates one of those reactions, to recognize that the basic primary first sensation. And
Nice.
that's taking some practice because it happens. I mean, we're talking milliseconds, as you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm working on training the body mind to do that in that moment. And that's a bit back to the baby steps thing, because it's starting to head that direction, but it's going to take a while. With that, I need to ask you something before we run out of time.
Yeah.
With regards to fetters 4 and 5 and
Yep.
the thinness and emptiness of thought,
Yeah.
um, and there are probably a couple of questions here. So the first one would be, does it take, do many people tend to experience this as something that takes a fair amount of time and work to get to? Because, I can see that. I can see how empty a thought is, but I still more often than not will get snared by them. Or if I can get in front of the thought and see, okay, I don't need to do that. Thought comes up, do X. Like,
Yep.
it's just a thought. Why is that giving orders around here?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then, and you know how decision making works. It's not that somebody's doing it. It's there's something happening below the threshold of awareness in the committee. And then somehow the decision gets made to go ahead and do that anyway.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, completely.
manage to get in front of the thought, but then the committee decides otherwise, and we're off to the races. And
Yeah.
so I keep coming back to it, keep coming back to it, keep coming back to it. But it just seems like it's something that is just going to take a lot of time and a lot of work to get to the point where eventually it kind of breaks down, and you just recognize that thought is just thought, and it stops having any power to direct or move a body to do anything. But it hasn't happened yet.
No, well, this is the thing. I can't say whether I don't know the statistics on how long it takes for different people because everybody
Okay,
is different, right? Everybody's got
sure.
their own. And I think what it mostly comes down to is that there's an insight which is generalizable when you get that recognition that, okay, I can think right now about a pink grasshopper. And I recognize that there is nothing inherently real or tangible, and that there's like this sort of gauzy, vague wispiness of that thought of a pink grasshopper. And then you can create a whole story about this pink grasshopper who went on a walk one day. And, you can have this real narrative about all the people and other insects that the grasshopper talked to. And he had the, best day of his life. And then there was a thunderstorm and he was dodging for his life under, from huge rain pellets and blah, blah, blah. You can have all of this stuff and you can get more and more ingrained in that kind of story. And you start to feel a little bit more engaged with this grasshopper who's running for his life. And, he just wants to get back to his grasshopper family. And, you can start to feel that. But if you notice that as this is going on, you're having sensations in the body that are starting to accompany those images. When you just thought of a pink grasshopper, there's basically nothing there. You don't really feel anything. It's just a wispy thought. But
Yeah.
now, as it starts to congeal into an actual story where you have emotion involved and you have like life and death stakes and all of that, you're starting to feel a little bit of something in the body. And that is starting to give density to this narrative imaginary world. And those thoughts start to feel a little bit more substantial, even though it is exactly made of the same substance. But you're starting to have some physical component to it. And
Okay.
so when you start to look at all of your thoughts in just, daily living, just doing other stuff, and you're just engaging and noticing what thoughts are arising, notice that like if it's a visual thought, it is just a gauzy visual, very, very thin, insubstantial thought, no matter
Yeah.
what it's about. If it's a voice in your head, notice that it is just sound, which is thin and insubstantial and completely non-locatable. It's just sound that's happening in the mind. And then notice when you have those sticky thoughts that are really a problem, where you start to get caught up on them. How much is going on in the body? How much of this thought seems self-referential, precarious, dangerous, concerning? How much emotional investment is there with that particular thought that feels sticky? And how much is the body giving rise to this solidity of this thought?
Say that last part again. How much of this is giving rise to solidity?
How much of the bodily sensations are giving rise to that solidity of that thought?
Okay.
Because it's you're at that point when you're having a thought that you're really engaged with and you're really feeling like, okay, well, and after she goes through the surgery, then I've got blah, blah, blah. You are feeling stuff that is making that entire reality seem much more present and solid, and you're starting to live more in that world than in the present one. And
Oh, wow. That's okay. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, no, but you're still always just having experiences of visual images in the mind, sensations in the body, sounds floating around in space. And dissecting those seemingly, personal, important thoughts, which they still might be. I mean, again, it's also not to completely devalue the use of thinking and planning and all of that stuff. Still very helpful in the right context. But also goes back to what we were saying before about the ultimate, where we we do all of the planning, we do all of our best research and all of that we can, and then we still have to just kind of let go and recognize that we still don't know the outcome. You know, we there's an amount where we have to recognize the limitations of the mind. And that helps give rise to that openness where we recognize that there's a utility to thought up to a point, and then we have to just let go of the rest. You know, we can't be attached to making a decision and then be attached to the outcome of it as well. There's a period where we do the research, we make a decision, we let go, and then see what happens. Maybe course correct at some point, re-engage, but doing it in a way where we are not constantly bound in that world of thought as though it were really happening and as though it's this personally derived experience. But the seeing through that seeming solidity of all of that happens when we start to just let go of that, um, the expectations of what that thought is giving us.
Let go of the expectations of what that thought is giving us. Like, how would that look? Give me an
Yeah.
example.
If you're thinking about, for instance, like Susanna's upcoming health stuff, right, which I'm assuming would feel like a really intense thing when you're thinking about it, there's an expectation that I'm going to think about it, I'm going to plan what happens if, make all of those plans, and it feels like that thought is going to actually put the world in order.
Oh, I
It
see.
it is either going to protect the certain outcome from happening that I don't want to happen, or it's at least going to solidify and protect and insulate, you and Tuesday or whatever for this outcome, or you're trying to create a world where there is some sort of safety on the other end of whatever happens.
So, are you saying that letting go of the idea that a thought can reliably produce an outcome?
Yeah, effectively, that's a much more efficient way of saying it than what I said.
Okay.
But yeah,
All
exactly.
right.
The expectation that it can reliably produce that outcome is what we're kind of indulging in when we are believing in the thought. And it's just recognizing that it has a purpose up to a point, and then we just don't know. And that helps devalue the power of that thought.
Okay.
And then,
I think that's one of the, I think that's been one of the missing components in helping me get this because I've been working at this pretty consistently since we first started talking about this back in the fall. And it's gotten some results. There's been some progress, but it's been
yeah,
minimal. And it just feels like it kind of got to this one point and then it just kind of stalled.
yeah. Um, I would say really dissect those seemingly personal and important thoughts. Like I said, it's great to investigate those kind of normal, incidental, random thoughts that pop up, and you can see, okay, well, I have no idea why I just thought about a polka dot car. Like it's just bloop, and it comes up and it goes. That's great to recognize that that just seems really random and automatic, but investigate the ones that seem purposeful and potent and personal, and then break down what the full experience is of having that thought. Where exactly is the visual image being seen? Where
Say, break down
exactly,
what? Break
uh,
down, sorry to interrupt you, but
no,
break
it's all right.
down.
Break down the total experience of that, what it is to have that thought. So, where exactly is the mental visual image of that being seen? How solid is it really? Where is it showing up? How big is it? Is it taking up the same field of vision as if you had your eyes open and you were seeing the world around you? Is it located someplace else? Be very specific about how the visual aspect of it shows up. Do the
Okay.
same thing with the auditory aspect when you're talking to yourself in your head. Break that down to like, where is that sound really showing up? And then the most important thing is
Mm.
what is happening in the body during all of that? And is there a seeming emotional correlation to it,
I got to tell you
and
something
all of
funny.
that? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I thought you were at the end of the sentence.
No,
You
it's just yeah.
know, we talked some time back, and you said that part of the reason that thoughts are so believable is because we hear them in our voice.
Yeah.
This is an ongoing project. It's going to take time because it's a deeply ingrained habit. But I realized that if I could undo that, then that probably would help to begin to dissolve that whole thing based around thought because it's in my voice. So I've
Yeah.
been working on training myself when the mental voice pops up to have it show up in the voice of Bobcat Goldthwait.
That is hilarious. That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Might be a little bit annoying, but really brilliant.
No, I've always got a kick out of his voice.
He's hysterical.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
so over the top that there's no way you can take anything said in that voice seriously.
I love that. It would be really funny if that somehow started to actually influence your externalized voice too. And you started actually picking up his inflection.
That would be funny. Well, I know we're pushing the clock because you've got another meeting. So, kind of related to this very quickly.
Yeah.
Um, it's been kind of a frustrating experience in the last, I don't know, it's been the last 3 or 4 weeks that it started to really come up that, and it almost causes me, almost is the operative word, almost causes me to question that moment of seeing through self, the first fetter dissolving last July because of this stuff coming up. But like I've said before, I managed to write down and make some really good specific notes about it, so I can go back and read it and go, yeah, okay, that is what happened.
Yeah.
But there are these times where something will happen, and it may not even be any big thing, but there will just be this sense of self, and so that started really kind of leading to some feelings. I'm not sure what they are exactly because I'm thinking, well, I saw through the sense of self, but this keeps coming up, and it seems really believable. So what the hell is it? And so I've started looking into it, and it's pretty consistently the same things. It's that sort of felt sense of the body, which
Hmm.
tends to be centralized. It tends to be right around here, and it's kind of in the middle of the body. And so there's that somatic sense.
Yeah.
And then there are usually, not always, but usually there are very fleeting mental pictures.
Yep.
And there's the visual field. The visual field is consistent. That's all. I can't think of a time when I've stopped to look and not found the visual field playing a part in it. And then thought.
Yep.
At the very least, it's the visual field and the somatic sense. But a lot of the time, like 80-90%, there will also be the thoughts and the very, very quick mental pictures.
Yeah.
And so I keep coming back to it, keep looking, and I keep thinking, maybe there's something I'm not finding. Maybe there's something going on here that I'm not seeing that's making this believable. But I never can find anything else. But that sense keeps coming up. This experience keeps happening where it feels like there's someone here. And then the question becomes, okay, who's here? What is making a self in this moment? And I can't find anything beyond the things I just described.
Yeah.
But if I don't find anything else, but there's something that seems to make it very believable. I can't seem to nail that down. If there is not anything else, if I'm not missing anything, why in the hell is that so believable? And what can I do to begin to break that down?
Okay. Well, a couple questions then.
Okay.
First of all, I love the fact that you're noticing it and that you're just investigating on the spot. Is this, what else is this? What is actually here? So absolutely love that. A, is it, what do you mean by when you say that it's believable?
Uh, it seems real. It's sort of like the mind automatically accepts that sense, that composite sense, even though
Mhm.
at the moment it doesn't tend to be taken as a composite. That doesn't happen until a minute is taken to go and look at it and see what's actually going on there. But that sense, the mind on some level is taking that sense as, oh yeah, that's me. Like, yeah, that's me. Sure, that's me. And I'm like, no, it's not. That's you've just been doing that a long time.
So, um, what happens when you recognize that, oh, there's a visual field and there's a sense of sensation here? And what happens to that sense of self then?
Uh, it's I don't want to say that it's entirely gone, but it ceases to exist the way it had before, where it's taken as one whole thing. It's
Mhm.
not taken as a composite. It's now seen like, okay, well, this has components, and
Mhm.
so it takes some of the um, takes some of the substance or um, substance or what's the word? Um, Not veracity. I guess I don't know what I'll say. It takes some of the substance and believability
Yeah,
out of it.
excellent.
So
So why is it a problem that it's there? Because there's clearly an idea that I need for it to go away.
right. Well, and I can understand that because there are two things at least at work there. One is the mind has this idea that um, that is an impediment to uh, deepening um, deepening this process of um, um, freedom from the illusion of self. But the other problem is the fact that the mind takes this fabrication um, without question as a true thing. And I think that's more bothersome. Like, no,
So
it's not. You're believing a lie. You know,
I would flip it around and I would say rather than considering this as an impediment, consider this as an amazing springboard because
huh,
every time you recognize this, it gives you another opportunity to investigate.
okay,
So every time you investigate it, you experience it, and then you experience it dissolve again. And see if you can just lay back in that dissolving where it no longer is the things that it used to be. So that you're seeing over and over again that just like the thoughts that we talked about aren't really a cohesive, real thing as long as we're
right,
observing it, this experience of me existing in some way is just another thought. It's based off
hmm,
of the same lack of solidity, but there's a real thing, right? You took a thought to be real because there is a mental image, a mental sound, and some physical sensations in the body.
right,
You take the me to be real in a moment because there are mental images, physical sensations in the body, and maybe some sounds. It's exactly the same variety of sensations that are being assumed to be a real collective substantial unity.
right,
So it's the same process. So in investigating thought in the way that we talked about, and in investigating this sense of self in this way, both of them are effectively getting to the same root. They're dissolving the belief in or the inherent believability in that experience of binding effectively. And we know, the brain binds. It takes a whole
mhm,
bunch of different experiences from all these different senses and it lumps them together into something that feels like a moment that's cohesive and happening. And we can, presume that the voice we hear is coming out of the person whose mouth is moving, even though actually the timing isn't really correct and we're not hearing it coming from their mouth. And it's, none of that is really happening. But the brain is very good at creating a world that seems believable. And that's all that's happening here. It's
yeah,
taking elements of experience and making a unity that seems believable. So all we need to do is just recognize anytime we recognize it happening what the actual parts are and let it unbind for a moment.
okay,
And in itself, it's it's not a, the the experience of cohesion isn't inherently a problem. It's a belief in the truth of that experience.
hmm,
Just like when we talk in the sixth fetter about three-dimensional vision and then having those experiences of two-dimensionality or the lack of space, three-dimensional vision is not a problem. It's just something where it's useful to notice that it's not actually true the way that we experience it. That our experience is that overlay is not quite the way that our real raw experience is, and there is something um, to be learned from that, or to be, um, an insight to be gained from that. There's an insight to be gained from breaking down that sense of self
Mm,
to the fact that no, no, there really isn't anything there. These were just little separate parts that were being glued together by the mind.
hmm.
And every time you do that, it's one more deepening of that insight. Oh, there it is
Ah,
again. It's
so
gone.
it's a matter of being willing to continue on a process consistently and be patient with that process.
Exactly. And the process may not end, right? It's not inherently a problem that you see three-dimensional. And it's not inherently a
No,
problem that it feels like there's this mind-body organism that's moving through space. There can be, like we talked about with thought, there can be a utility to being able to plan and think and reason and have this idea of a
sure,
self in a world and all of that. In society, there's a utility to that. But when we buy into it and have that as our only viewpoint, that this is an absolute reality. I am a Darrell who has had this whole life story that has led to this Darrell being in a particular way, and I have a family that is exactly like this, and we have to exist for so many years, and it has to go like this, and everything I see is real. That's a problem. Then that's an issue. But every time we undermine that and we break it apart into its bits and pieces, then you're seeing through the illusion, and that's what we're talking about. That waking
right,
up is not believing that the world is exactly the way that we see it.
right,
But we can still experience it that way. I can still experience that that's a couch and a TV and that there's an outside of a window and all of that. But I can also flip into that way of experiencing where it's just color and shape and things are like, kind of two-dimensional, and really couldn't tell if that's a window or a painting or a high def screen or anything else, like it's all a projection of the mind. And to recognize that gives us a lot of opening and insight and what we call, awakening experiences. But in itself, there is nothing wrong with just navigating a world as a human who can navigate a world.
no, there's nothing wrong with that. I just, and not that I'm concerned about this. I think I've already dodged this bullet, but if we buy into that, absolutely, then we wind up starting, what I frequently see happen to these people are what a comedian Bill Hicks called fevered egos. And like last night I I stumbled across it, and out of curiosity I listened because I like Terry Gross. I always thought she was pretty cool, the interviewer for NPR.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And she did an interview with Gene Simmons of Kiss. Oh my God. Oh, holy cow, man. I have never heard such self-absorbed narcissism and such
Yeah.
crassness and
That,
self-involvement. It was just, I mean, the only reason I could finish listening to it, which actually wasn't that long, she cut it short. But the only reason I could listen to the whole thing was because I was just curious to hear how she was going to handle it.
yeah, yeah. He is a giant walking ego.
Oh man,
Yeah.
totally out of control. I mean, he makes the Tangerine Tyrant seem like a walk in the park.
Completely. Yeah,
God.
it's wild when you see them, but that's the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you can break, he doesn't have that insight to be able to break apart his experience and
Right.
recognize that this is just a role that he's playing occasionally, and that or
Mm-hmm.
that's being played, and that really there's nothing there. It's just empty space on the inside.
Right.
There's nothing else, but it expresses its way in these ways. That's what we're talking about. So every time you have that feeling of congealing into something, just
Mm-hmm.
take that as another moment of opportunity to
Yeah.
experiment and investigate and inquire and just let it.
I'll keep doing it. I mean, it's starting to become something of a habit, which is
Excellent.
really interesting because it really kind of happened on its own. Which again, yeah, I know the problem with that with saying it that way, but the difference here is that it was never something that showed up with a strong intention around it to give it that extra boost. It
Yeah,
showed up and just started going, kind of
that's
like one of those
awesome.
self-powered lawnmowers.
Yep. Love that. Absolutely love that. Toyed with the idea of getting one of those, but there's something to the automatic that's really handy in all of our experiences, even our mowing of the lawn.
Well, hopefully it works out better for you than it did us. But I know you've got another meeting, so I don't want to hold you. But There
Thank
are
you.
people out there who have commented, and they've said that it's always great when the dogs show up. So
Yeah, yeah.
she's been sleeping here in my lap in a position where I've had to support her. All right, for all of you who are happy when the dogs show up, here's Sweetie.
Hey, hi, hey, sweet. Oh, so cute. So sweet.
She is. She's my girly.
Did I tell you I'm doing a POK talk?
No.
Yeah, yeah. They invited me to do one of those core talks. It's February 23rd. It's a Sunday. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're talking. I'm going to talk about basically, well, kind of what we were just talking about, but how to inquire in daily life into all 10 fetters throughout the day.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, it should be a fun talk.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
So looking forward to it.
So I will talk to you at some point in time before too long.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much. Have a
Yeah.
great week, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take
All right.
care.
Yeah, you too. Bye.